Will Ukraine become an EU member? Kyiv has just started formal talks to join the bloc. It comes after Moscow declined an offer of direct talks to end the war. So, would membership protect Ukraine? And what would it mean for Europe? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. Ukraine's bid to join the European Union has received a boost this week. Accession negotiations have finally kicked off. Ukraine is hoping that it will provide it with some security guarantees as the war with Russia drags on. Moscow has long objected to Kyiv strengthening its ties with the West, and now Ukraine will have to fulfil the EU's requirements before it can be accepted as a member. And that will include reforms on a host of issues, including tackling corruption. But what are the risks of integrating a country at war into the bloc? And how will Russia respond? We'll discuss that with our guests in a moment. But first, this report from Michael Apple.
Kyiv is heralding it as a Rubicon moment and says there's no going back. Ukraine is now officially in negotiations to join the European Union. It will now have to commit to a host of political, economic, and judicial reforms that align it with the rules of the 27-member bloc. It's taken more than 4 years to get to this point. Ukraine applied for membership just 4 days into Russia's invasion in February 2022. Kyiv has been fighting Russia, while also battling against the perception that corruption in the country is pervasive. Failure to address this would make its EU bid a non-starter. A recent survey by a local think tank found Ukrainians themselves consider corruption as more of a threat than Russia's invasion. But Kyiv has made some progress, and Brussels says it's satisfied with the pace of reforms.
No country has ever achieved such progress on its accession path while fighting the most brutal Russian atrocities on its territory.
For years, Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban blocked Ukraine's EU aspirations. But in April, his government lost the elections, and the new leadership in Budapest is welcoming Kyiv's application. Others, like Germany, have sought to grant Ukraine associate EU member status, allowing it to participate in summits without granting it voting rights. The Ukrainian president has rejected that plan. He wants full membership and warns there's likely more stalling tactics to come from the Kremlin.
Russia will find a way how to block Ukraine's way to EU. They don't want to see us successful.
Moscow insists Kyiv wants to use the bloc as an anti-Russian military alliance, following its failed bid to convince Washington and others it should join NATO.
The EU is building all of its security structures against the Russian Federation. Ukraine's accession to the EU will be exploited by those who want to militarize it.
European leaders will meet in Brussels on Thursday to discuss Ukraine's EU membership bid. While there's momentum, Kyiv has a long path to walk, beset with bureaucratic barriers and potential hurdles that may imperil the entire process. Michael Apple, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Now let's bring in our guest. Peter Zalmayev is Executive Director at the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. He joins us from Kyiv. Theresa Fallon is the Director at the Centre for Russia, Europe, Asia Studies. She joins us from Brussels. And Alexander Bratersky is an independent journalist and political analyst. He joins us from Moscow. A warm welcome to each of you. I'd like to begin with Peter in Kyiv first. Vladimir Putin has been very clear. Ukraine is Russian territory. At the very least, it's within Russia's sphere of influence. So by going for EU membership, are you playing with fire and effectively destroying any chance of a negotiated settlement to the full-scale invasion?
I'm just not sure how much worse, our situation will be. And of course, Putin went into this war under a variety of pretenses and excuses, and one of them was Ukraine's imminent, as he claimed, membership in NATO. And for a while, we heard from Russian government officials that they were okay with the EU membership. Right now, lately, we've been hearing that that's also off the table. It seems that there's simply no amount of concessions Ukraine can give to Putin, short of some completely ceding its sovereignty to Moscow to placate them. They'll continue inventing reasons. They see now that as long as Donald Trump is in office, NATO is off the table. So now they have to find another excuse. And all of a sudden, of course, that is EU membership, because Ukraine is now engaged in serious talks, and the first cluster of conditions is being considered. And so, of course, they are in search of new excuses to make to continue their war. So let's not fall victim to a sort of a Stockholm syndrome here and try to placate the aggressor. No amount of pleading will do, because Putin remains adamant about controlling all of Ukraine.
Alexander, Russia has absolutely no right to have this kind of say over a sovereign nation. What do you make of that argument?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, joining the EU or not joining the EU is, of course, that's the Ukrainian ability and Ukrainian desire. And I would agree with my counterpart that, yes, before Russia did not say anything about the EU membership, even on this early negotiations started with Ukraine over the war in the early term when Russia was not against the Ukraine joining EU. But in Russia, you actually heard Foreign Minister Lavrov saying that Ukraine can destroy the union from itself, right? So within. So that means Russia does not have very much articulated position on now. But I see, but reasonable people in Russia believe that actually the EU membership for Ukraine is a long shot, and all this will be done after the war, and the war is still prolonged. The conflict is still going on, so we don't see the EU membership for Ukraine in foreseeable future. Although Moldova, another country which is actually also on the table, can become EU member more sooner, because it doesn't have a border with Russia. Yes, it has this Russian population there, but it's more or less not in a conflict with Russia. And so with Moldova, it seems to be more faster. Although we know with Turkey example, joining EU is a long process, even for the peaceful country.
Theresa, what are the pitfalls here of a country at war trying to join the EU?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think that there's always been a feeling here in Brussels that they need to give the Ukrainian people hope. And by offering possible EU membership was something to keep them motivated, not to be demoralized. And so I think that has been always key. Now, Ukraine has a large population and it's a big country, so it would be far more difficult to absorb than, say, the smaller country, as the previous speaker mentioned, Moldova. But Moldova, for many years now, has been making the reforms, the tough reforms necessary to become an EU member state. I think they've closed 16 chapters already to meet European requirements. So they have a good chance of getting in if the will remains within the EU to extend membership. So Chancellor Merz of Germany, understanding this difficult situation that Ukraine is facing, has offered kind of a halfway house to the Ukrainians, suggesting that they would have a seat, maybe even a non-voting seat, though, but they would be present in the institutions, present for the discussions. They would have access to the single market of the EU, which would be very important. And they would also have other funds available to them. So I think that Zelenskyy, who immediately rejected this, maybe should rethink it, because let's face it, it's going to be very difficult. Ukraine is still at war. It will need massive funds to rebuild. And I think at least they would be on a track to EU membership. Now, behind closed doors, politicians might be saying different things than they say publicly about Ukraine. So I think that we really need to work, that the Europeans need to put their money where their mouth is. And I would suggest that the recent G7 summit showed a great level of solidarity. Even, everyone had low expectations. Maybe that's the key. But Donald Trump coming into Evian, France, for the G Summit, just celebrated his 80th birthday, got a memorandum of understanding about Iran. The Strait of Hormuz looks like it might be opening again. And so he was on a high. And so they were able to manage a joint statement. And they also pledged more support for Ukraine, which is something that Trump administration was reluctant to do earlier. So this is positive momentum. Zelenskyy was also attending the G7 the entire time, not just in meetings, but will also be at the dinner at Versailles today. And so I think that Zelenskyy, if he's able to keep good relations with Trump, and he was showing the disaster, the destruction of these ancient 1,000-year-old ancient church and monastery, that I think he won Trump's ear, and that's a really positive development.
Peter, what Theresa is talking about is this kind of associate membership, which has never been done before in the history of the EU. It's a golden opportunity. So why is Kyiv turning it down? Why did Zelenskyy turn it down, do you think?
Well, of course, he's taking out a maximalist position. He, I think, is so personally invested in this project of nation building. And he, I think, deservedly also and justifiably believes that Ukrainians have earned their right to be a member of the European family with their blood. And no one has paid quite the same sacrifice to do that. But we are seeing that at the same time that the political will to accept Ukraine right now is just simply not there. I think it's an important signal, that sort of offer for Ukraine, and of course the continued promise of future financial assistance. We're talking $90 billion that was unblocked after Viktor Orban of Hungary lost his election. That is not petty cash. That is very significant. And of course, joint production of weaponry, drones, technology, maybe licensing deal producing jointly with the Europeans, the Patriot missiles that Ukraine so badly needs. This is all very important. But let's not get our hopes up regarding any membership soon. This may not happen for years, maybe a decade. And of course, in 5 years or 10 years, we'll be talking about a totally different set of players, both in Ukraine and in the European countries. And God only knows what happens then.
I want to go to Alexander now. Theresa mentioned the G7 there. The G7 is actually, this particular meeting, as Theresa pointed out, has been very crucial because you've got Europe now really backing Ukraine. Ukraine's made tactical advantages on the battlefield. It's now trying to press that into diplomatic advantage. Russia seemed a bit lonely. It wasn't there, obviously, but it doesn't seem to have many cards. What do you think of that?
Well, Russian cards are probably somewhere else. You see the situation in the Middle East, and looks like for President Putin, this feeder is also very important. But we also see, yes, Mr. Trump actually listens more to the Europeans into their position on Ukraine. But however, that Mr. Trump, we all know that Mr. Trump's position is very moody. When he talk about Iranian talks and, this or that, we don't know what's going to happen with Iran. And are they going to really sign the peace accord, which will satisfy both sides? Getting back to Ukraine, yes, Russian situation, yes, it's difficult, I have to admit it, with all this drones coming over on the refineries and people are angry over gas prices, right? But with the, civilian casualties on both sides are heavy. And the people on both sides are demanding justice from their presidents. Of course, we know that, of course, the war started not by Ukraine. But however, when you had civilian casualties, people actually in every country would actually say, we need to continue this war. We need to continue this war. And I just want to mention also another important factor that Mr. Lukashenko, very close Putin ally, although maintains sort of independency in some sorts, he he said this war is not winnable militarily, and political solution needs to be done. So this guy is not a stupid. He's smart, and he's actually thinking of that. Maybe he's telling to Mr. Putin, yes, there will be maybe in the fall there will be a time for serious negotiations with the Ukrainians, Americans, and the Europeans. So I think now both sides on summer are planning to take advantages as more as they can, while the summer allows them to continue fighting.
Theresa, Alexander makes a very good point. Donald Trump has flip-flopped between Ukraine and Putin. He's very proud of his relationship with Vladimir Putin. But is there a chance here that Europe could go it alone and push for a peace deal with Russia without any kind of American involvement? Or is American involvement absolutely crucial?
Well, it's interesting. At the G7, Zelenskyy proposed, when he made the phone call to wish Trump a happy birthday on his 80th birthday, he suggested that Trump host a Putin-Zelenskyy meeting in Washington, D.C. And that's what Zelenskyy really wants, to have direct talks, which Russia does not want to have at all. So I think that maybe if he can warm Trump up to this over the course of the G7, that would be really beneficial, because that's really what's needed. The Europeans, there's mixed messaging on that. Some feel that this would just muddy the waters further. Others feel that Europe really needs a seat at the table. But I think that if there could be direct talks between Zelenskyy and Putin, that would be really a big break of this impasse, because Putin has really not wanted to do that. That would recognize Zelenskyy as the leader of Ukraine, which he doesn't want to recognize. So if Trump can actually help that along, that would be a huge win for Zelenskyy, I would say. And it's very unclear. Putin's position has been maximalist from the very beginning. And Trump has a lot on his plate right now. He has a lot of issues. And I think that it's becoming more apparent to him, the Russia-China convergence of interests. He's tried the reverse Kissinger or reverse Nixon with Putin trying to pull him closer to the US, and that really has not worked at all. So I think that Trump might have, depending who he's spoken to last and what his advisors are telling him, I think that this might be a big change for him. The biggest loser in all of this, of the war in Iran, could be Putin, because it shows that Russia doesn't really have much influence in the region any longer. It traditionally did. We even saw the recent vote in Armenia, usually under Russian influence, has voted away from Russia. The Russian candidates did not win. The positive candidates towards Russia did not win. Pashinyan, the leader of Armenia, was returned to office, and he's looking more westward. So this war in Ukraine has really kind of been a huge loss for Russia. They have seen Sweden, Finland join NATO. They've seen, a loss of
Theresa, I'm
going
to stop you there, because there's a lot of points that you've just made that I want to pick up with our other guest, Peter. One of the points I want to bring up with you is you've got Vladimir Putin and then you've got Donald Trump, who have this relationship that kind of goes back and forth. Is it time for Ukraine just to really put all its eggs with the European basket and just get Europe to try and push forward for a peace deal? America doesn't seem to be kind of getting there for you.
Well, it keeps bringing me back to the point that I think Henry Kissinger once made, that, when he needs to call Washington, he knows the number to dial. He calls the White House. When he needs to call Europe, who does he call? Even though since then, of course, Europe has united into this confederation of the European Union, it's still not a country. And we see how fractious politics of Europe have been. Returning to my point about the eventual EU membership, when 5 years from now, 10 years from now, once again, who knows what will happen? Will there be any more Brexits, Frexits? Will there be a Frexit? Will there be other countries leaving? Of course, resurgence of right-wing populist parties. So this is to say that we would be standing on very shaky ground if we cast our lot exclusively with the Europeans. Once again, Europeans and their ability to make weapons, sophisticated weapons, and the political will to increase their military budgets to the requisite level is still not there. We need Patriot missiles, as I have alluded to just a few minutes ago. Europe does not have the capability to do that. They need a license from the United States. So I wish we could sort of decouple like that. And there's been a little bit of that, at least on the rhetorical level. But I can only hope and pray that this transatlantic unity holds, because Europe and America need each other, and Ukraine needs both.
Peter, has this been damaging for Russia's standing within, let's call it, the sphere of influence in Eastern Europe? Viktor Orban has gone. That was a staunch ally. People are looking at Russia now and thinking, well, you know, as you said, Lukashenko is talking about the fact that this needs to be a settled peace. Has Russia's image in the region, with its own allies, been damaged?
Well, you see, President Putin is now hosting the summit of the Asian nations, right? Where also a divide between, all those nations, as far as we see the Russian ally Vietnam is not really supportive of the Kremlin policy. Of course, it was damaging. However, you have realistic people within the Kremlin who are saying, well, not on the Kremlin, but let's say those who are advising the Kremlin, who are saying this: there should be negotiations. There should be even, Russia drops a bomb on Ukraine. I'm sorry, and I'm quoting this from Vasily Kashin, who is a very respected scientist, a respected political scholar, who just recently wrote a story in a magazine called "The Russia's Foreign Affairs: The Russian Global Politics," where he suggested that talks should be done and soon. And this prolonging the conflict is actually bad for Russia economy and political sphere. So we have different people saying different things now. So there is a bit of dissent within the political system as far as the conflict is concerned, and we see that.
But Alexander, is that dissent being listened to by Putin? It doesn't sound like it is.
Well, no president can actually admit his mistakes or failures. I mean, George Bush did not admit. I'm not comparing the situation in Iraq with Ukraine, but yes, it's only after the war is finished. Every war president is facing the opposition, not the opposition, but let's say people who will say questions, who will address to him, and who will say, okay, you done this, but here's the situation in our country. The situation in our country is not good.
Right.
And you are the commander-in-chief. And even people who were supportive of Putin because of the war are now saying that, see, the situation in Russia is going bad economically, and people feel it with the gasoline prices and so on. And Russia is a very divided nation. It's not a monolith nation. It's republics. It has different regions. It still has different opinions, right? So, yes, we will see that let's say we will see it in the fall. I mean, the elections will not show us anything, but the problem is like there will be a showing of sort of like discontent or a bit of disarray within the system, right? After the summer. I think the fall is always very important to calculate and to see.
I'm going to come to you in just a moment, Peter. I'm going to ask the same question to both you and to Theresa. I'm going to start with Theresa first. Is there a danger here that Ukraine is just hiding behind EU membership, EU protection, and like Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, says, it's just going to drag Europe into a war?
Well, of course, that's what everyone is deeply concerned about. Even a NATO war we saw with the actions recently of a drone in Romania. So there's caution, but I think that there would be no EU membership until Ukraine war was finished, however long that would take. But I think Putin he's pulling everything out of the basket that he can possibly do. And I agree that he's a bit desperate. We see, how long can the war go on? It's 5 years now. It's longer than World War I. And even Russian elites, I mean, they don't have access to the internet. They can't use ATMs anymore. Things are very unpredictable. Cost of food, cost of energy. People are having fatigue. And there are some concerns that there would be a mass conscription within Russia, and that would really turn the public against this. But I don't know how long Putin can continue this. The figures are about 35,000 men a month either killed or injured
Theresa,
from
we're
Russia.
running out of time there. We're running out of time there, and I want to go back to Peter. Peter, it's the same question. Are you just about to drag Europe into war by hiding behind Europe?
Well, I think that, Europe is already at war. Let's face it, right? It will be prosecuted along hybrid lines. NATO still holds, yes, with problems, etc. Russia is wary of attacking Europe outright. But we've seen drones flying over Poland and Romania. We've seen assassinations throughout Europe. We've seen snafu regarding the Russian tankers near the shores of Great Britain. So I think Europe needs to wake up and realize that Russia is already very much actively at war with it.
Final thought coming from Alexander. Alexander, from everything that you've seen, do you think that Ukraine and the EU are going to forge this path despite what Russia thinks?
They will, but they will take a long time. And I can tell you something really quickly. If the more reasonable, let's say more politically reasonable people are coming over, let's say after a few years in Russia, even the realistic people, they will be more okay with Ukraine, with European Union than in NATO. And if Ukraine in some kind of union, for them, it's actually better than Ukraine is independently alone, although it is, of course, will be an independent country by itself. I mean, in the union, it will have certain restraints, and actually it's much more better for those people who will see it realistically. But NATO, of course, is a different question.
Theresa, very, very quickly, because we are running out of time, is NATO a red line, or do you think that's going to happen in the future for Ukraine?
I think that's kind of fallen off the table right now. Russia traditionally uses frozen conflicts to prevent countries from joining NATO, and that might be one of their strategies towards Ukraine. But I would suggest at this point, there are so many unpredictable aspects. They just hope that this war in Ukraine will end quickly, and I don't expect to see Ukraine membership talked about at this stage.
I want to thank all our guests, Peter Zalmayev, Theresa Fallon and Alexander Bratersky, and thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. That's it for me, Imran Khan, and the team here. Al Jazeera's coverage continues in just a moment. Stay tuned.